Somewhere right now, a 35-year-old is sitting across a desk from a very friendly person in a very nice suit. And that person is about to sell them something that will cost 12 times more than the thing they actually walked in for. They won't feel robbed. They'll feel responsible. They'll walk out of that office thinking they just made the smart, grown-up, protect your family decision. And on paper, the numbers will look almost reasonable. That's the part nobody warns you about. The most expensive financial mistake of your entire life rarely feels like a mistake while you're making it. It feels like maturity. It feels like finally doing the thing the adults were supposed to do. So today we're going to run the actual math on the two products fighting for that desk: term life and whole life insurance. I'm going to show you exactly where the $4,000 a year quietly disappears to, who it goes to, and why the person explaining it to you is almost never the person who'll tell you the truth about it. I'm Max, and this is Max Sense, the channel where we run the numbers the salesperson is hoping you never will. I read the policy illustrations, the commission schedules, and the actuarial studies so that you don't have to. No products to sell you here. No affiliate insurance link in the description. Just the math laid out flat so you can see the shape of it. If that's the kind of thing you want in your head before someone in a suit draws you a friendly little chart, do me a favor and subscribe. We do exactly this every single week. Here's the frame I want you to carry through this entire video. Whole life insurance is sold to you as one thing, wearing the costume of another. Underneath, it's an investment. On the outside, it's dressed up as insurance. And it's priced like a luxury car. The entire sales pitch, every chart, every reassuring word, depends on you never separating the costume from the thing standing inside it. So that's our job today. We're going to take that costume off one layer at a time, slowly, and look at what's actually been standing there the whole meeting. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now here's the contradiction that makes this entire industry work. Term and whole life are sold by the same person, in the same meeting, to protect against the exact same event. You dying while people still depend on your income. Same goal, same desk, same handshake. But one of them costs about $30 a month, and the other costs about $375. Sit with that gap for a second. That's not a small difference. That is not the deluxe version of the same thing. That is the difference between a phone plan and a car payment every month for decades. And when a single salesperson can offer you two products for the identical problem, and one of them costs 12 times the other, you should feel a question light up in the back of your head. Not which one is better for me. That's the question they want you asking because it sounds sophisticated and it keeps you inside their frame. The real question, the one that unlocks this whole thing, is much simpler. Why does anyone sell the cheap one at all? If the expensive one is so much better, why does the $30 version even exist? And if the cheap one is good enough, why is it almost never the one that gets recommended? Hold on to that question because it is the entire video. The reason the expensive product exists, and the reason it gets pushed onto people who flatly do not need it, is not buried in the fine print. It's hiding in plain sight in who gets paid, how much, and when. And by the time we're done, you are going to look at that nice suit very, very differently. Let's start with what each one actually is in plain English because the names themselves are built to blur together. Term life is the simple one. You pay a premium. If you die during the term, say the next 20 years, your family gets the payout. If you don't die, the policy quietly ends, and you got nothing back except 20 years of not having to lie awake worrying. That's the whole product. It is pure insurance in exactly the way your car insurance is pure insurance. You don't expect your car insurance to build value. You don't check its balance. You expect it to be there if you crash, and to cost as little as possible the rest of the time. Whole life is the complicated one. It also pays out when you die, except it never expires. It covers your entire life, however long that is, and a portion of every single premium gets diverted into a side account called cash value. That account grows slowly over the years, and the pitch is that you can borrow against it later or cash it out. All that extra machinery is exactly why it costs what it costs. So let's stop talking in the abstract and put real numbers on the table. Our person is 35 years old, healthy, doesn't smoke, wants $500,000 of coverage so their family is protected through the mortgage years and the kids at home years. For a 20-year term policy, $500,000 in coverage runs that person about $30 a month. $360 a year. For a whole life policy, same person, same $500,000 in coverage, the premium is around $375 a month. $4,500 a year. Now look at those two numbers sitting next to each other. 360 versus 4,500. The whole life policy costs roughly 12.5 times more for the identical death benefit. Same $500,000 to your family if you die tomorrow. One costs you a streaming subscription. The other costs more than a lot of people's monthly grocery bill every month for life. And here's how that difference actually shows up in your real life. It's the Tuesday afternoon you finally sit down feeling proud that you're handling this, being the responsible one, and you walk out having committed to a $4,000 a year payment that you'll still be making when your kids are applying to college. The pride is completely real. The math is just doing something very different from what the pride thinks it's doing. So you're paying 12 times more. The salesperson's entire answer for why that's fine boils down to two words: cash value. It's not just insurance, it builds wealth. The money comes back to you. Term is just throwing money away. And this is the exact layer where most people stop asking questions because it sounds like the best of both worlds. Protection and a savings account fused into one responsible sounding product. So let's actually open up that savings account and look inside. The cash value inside a whole life policy grows at a guaranteed rate. And across the major carriers in 2026, that guaranteed rate sits somewhere around 2 to 4% a year. Now, participating policies from the big mutual companies can pay a dividend on top of that. But a dividend is not guaranteed. It moves around year to year, and the floor, the only thing actually promised to you in the contract, is that 2 to 4%. Hold that number. 2 to 4% guaranteed in a year when a plain high-yield savings account was paying 4 to 5 and demanding nothing of you. But here's the part that never makes it onto the brochure. In the early years, your cash value is close to nothing. Almost the entire premium goes to fees and to the person who sold it to you. The wealth building doesn't meaningfully start working until you're a decade or more into paying. Let me make that concrete. On that same $500,000 whole life policy, after 10 full years of paying, the guaranteed cash value might be around $34,600. Sounds okay until you remember that over those 10 years you paid in $45,000. A decade in, the savings account still holds less than you put into it. Now let's run the experiment the industry would really prefer you never run. Take that same person and that same gap. Whole life costs $4,500 a year. Term costs $360. The difference is $4,140 a year that the whole life buyer is handing over, supposedly to build wealth. So what if, instead, you bought the cheap term policy and you invested that $4,140 difference yourself every year for 30 years? I need to be very clear here. This is a thought experiment, not a recommendation, and a real-world return is never guaranteed. But if that difference earned a hypothetical 7% a year, the long-run figure people use for the broad stock market, then after 30 years you'd be sitting on roughly $418,000. And even if you ran it conservative at 5%, you'd still land near $289,000. $418,000 on one end, $289,000 on the other, versus a guaranteed cash value account crawling along at 2 to 4% that started at basically zero after the fees took their bite. That's the entire thing the phrase "buy term and invest the difference" is pointing at. It isn't magic and it isn't a trick. It's just refusing to pay a 12 times premium for a savings account that, in a good year, barely outruns inflation. Translation: you are not getting insurance plus an investment. You're getting insurance plus a mediocre investment, bundled so tightly together that you can never quite see how mediocre the investment actually is. Okay, so if whole life costs 12 times more, and the investment buried inside it grows slower than a boring index fund, the obvious question is the one I told you to hold on to. Why does anyone push this thing? Why is it recommended constantly, relentlessly, to young, healthy people who have absolutely no business owning it? And this is where we stop talking about insurance and start talking about incentives. Because here's a thing the friendly meeting will never make obvious. The person across that desk is not paid a salary to give you neutral advice. They are paid a commission, and that commission is calculated as a percentage of the premium you agree to pay. Just sit with the mechanics of that for a second because everything follows from it. When an agent sells a term policy, they earn somewhere between 30 and 80% of your first-year premium. On a $360 policy, that's small, a couple $100, and then almost nothing after that. When that same agent sells a whole life policy, they earn between 40% and over 100% of the first-year premium. And the first-year premium isn't $360. It's $4,500. So do the arithmetic with me. On the term sale, the agent makes maybe $200. On the whole life sale, for the exact same client, protecting the exact same family against the exact same death, the agent makes around $3,000 or more. That is not a typo, and it is not an exaggeration. For the same person, the same signature, the same handshake, the whole life sale pays the agent roughly 15 times what the term sale pays. And it gets sharper. That giant commission is front-loaded. The industry word for it is a heaped commission. Huge in year one, then it collapses to just a few percent in the years after. Which means the person selling you a 30-year relationship gets most of their entire payday in the first 12 months. Now, I am not telling you every agent is a villain. Most of them genuinely believe in what they sell. But, and this is the whole point, you do not need villains for this system to work. You only need incentives. When one product pays you $200 and the other pays you $3,000 for the identical amount of effort, you don't have to be corrupt to drift toward the $3,000. You just have to be a normal human being with a mortgage of your own. And zoom out to see the size of that drift. The life insurance industry paid out $63 billion in commissions in a single year, according to the industry's own fact book. $63 billion. That is the engine. That is the gravity that quietly bends the cheap, sensible product out of the room and the expensive one onto the table. Here's how it shows up in your real life. It's the friend of a friend who just got their insurance license, who honestly likes you, who sincerely wants to help, and who also, completely by the design of the system, makes 15 times more money if you sign the bigger policy. Both of those things are true at the same time. That's precisely what makes it so effective. The sincerity is real. So is the incentive. Now we reach the layer that, honestly, should be illegal to leave out of the pitch. Because everything we've talked about so far, the slow cash value, the high premium, it builds wealth over decades. Every bit of it rests on a single hidden assumption. That you keep the policy. For a very, very long time. The entire case for whole life depends on you holding it long enough for that slow cash value to finally crawl up, catch up, and eventually justify those enormous premiums. So the only honest question left is this. Do people actually hold it that long? First, walk the logic with me before we even get to the data. The fees are front-loaded into the early years. The benefit only arrives in the distant years. So the product only works for you if you survive the expensive beginning and make it all the way to the rewarding end. Which means the single most important number in this entire decision isn't the premium, or the rate, or the dividend. It's the odds that you personally make it to the finish line. And on that, we finally have real, peer-reviewed evidence, not a sales brochure with a smiling family on the cover. A study by Gottlieb and Smethurst, published in the American Economic Review, looked at exactly this question. And what they found is brutal. 29% of permanent life insurance policies lapse within the first 3 years. 3 years. And 57%, more than half lapse within the first 10. Read that again. More than half of the people who buy this product, lured in by the promise of long-term cash value, are gone before the long-term even begins to arrive. They stop paying. They surrender. And when you surrender a whole life policy in those early years, after the fees and the heaped commission already ate the front end, you very often walk away with far less than you paid in, sometimes close to nothing at all. So picture the full trap now assembled. You are sold an expensive product on the promise of a payoff that lives in decade 3. The costs are deliberately front-loaded into decade 1. And the data says there are better than even odds you won't even make it to decade 2. The researchers had a phrase for what they were seeing. They concluded that lapsing isn't the exception to how this product works. Lapsing is the norm. The product is, in effect, priced and built around the expectation that most buyers will quit and lose money on their way out the door. And that, more than anything else, is how an investment wearing insurance as a costume quietly pays for itself. Let's walk back to that desk one more time. The 35-year-old, the nice suit, the warm and patient explanation. I want to tell you what that meeting actually feels like from the inside, because it isn't stupidity that gets people here. It's the opposite of stupidity. He's in that chair because he's responsible. He just had a kid. He spent a few nights lying awake doing the thing every decent person does, imagining the worst, and what would happen to his family if he were suddenly gone. And so he did the adult move. He called someone. And the someone was warm and competent, and never once pushy. They drew a little chart, a clean line showing the cash value climbing year after year, into a big comfortable number by the time he turned 65. The chart felt like safety. It felt like he was finally being the kind of man his own father never quite managed to be. So he signed. $4,500 a year. And for 2 years he felt genuinely good about it. Then year 3 arrived. The car needed a transmission. The second kid showed up. The budget got tight in that specific, grinding way budgets get tight. And $4,500 a year for insurance suddenly started to feel very, very heavy. So he pulled up the cash value, the climbing number, the one that was supposed to be marching toward that comfortable future. And it was almost nothing, because the fees and the commission had devoured the early years, exactly the way the product was designed for them to. And now he is standing at the precise fork that most buyers eventually reach. Keep bleeding $4,500 a year for a reward that's still 2 decades out of reach. Or surrender the whole thing, eat the loss, and walk away with a fraction of everything he put in. Now here's the part that should sting. There was another version of this exact story. On that first Tuesday, that same responsible guy buys the $30 term policy instead. His family gets the identical $500,000 in protection, not a dollar less. And he quietly moves the difference into a plain index fund he never has to think about again. That guy is not standing at any fork. His family is just as protected. His money is still entirely his own, growing in something he controls. The only real difference between those two men, the trapped one and the free one, was which product happened to pay the person across the desk more money. Now, I promised you the honest version of this, and the honest version means telling you when whole life genuinely is the right answer. Because it isn't never. There are real, specific situations where permanent insurance is the correct tool, and pretending otherwise would make me just as dishonest as the suit. If you have a true permanent need, say, a child with a disability who will need financial support for their entire life, no matter how long you happen to live, then term insurance that expires when you're 65 doesn't solve that problem at all. Whole life can. That's a legitimate, important use. If you are a high earner who has already maxed out every tax-advantaged account available to you, your 401k, your IRA, the entire stack, and you're genuinely out of room and looking for another tax-deferred place to park money, the cash value can have a real role in that plan. That's a strategy. It's just a strategy for someone with a very particular, narrow problem, not for a 26-year-old still carrying a credit card balance. And then there's estate planning, large estates, where permanent insurance gets used very deliberately to handle taxes and pass wealth across a generation. None of that is a scam. So let me be precise about where the scam actually lives. The scam is not that whole life insurance exists. The scam is taking a tool that was built for a millionaire's estate problem and selling it to a young person whose actual, real-life problem is simply, I have people who depend on my paycheck for the next 20 years. That person needs the $30 answer, and they get handed the $4,000 one. Not because it fits them, but because of who happened to be standing across the desk, and how that person gets paid. Alright, you know exactly what's happening now. So let's talk about what you can actually do with that knowledge in concrete terms. First, figure out honestly whether your need is temporary or permanent, and be real with yourself about it. For the overwhelming majority of people under 35, the need is temporary. You need coverage for the specific years when other people depend on your income, the mortgage years, the young kids' years, the years where your disappearance would be financially catastrophic to someone. That is a job for term life, full stop. Second, if anyone ever recommends whole life to you, ask one question, out loud, calmly. How much do you make if I buy this versus the term version? Then watch the temperature of the room change. You are completely allowed to ask that. In some states, they're actually legally required to tell you the commission if you request it. The question alone often tells you everything. Third, separate the two jobs that the salesperson so carefully glued together. Insurance is one job. Investing is a totally different job. Buy your insurance from the insurance aisle as cheaply as you possibly can. Then do your investing somewhere that was actually built for investing, where you can see every fee. The bundling is the entire trick. Unbundling is the entire defense. You don't have to become a financial expert to win here. You just have to refuse to let two separate, important decisions get quietly made for you inside one warm, friendly conversation. So let's circle all the way back to the question I told you to hold on to at the very start. Why does anyone sell the cheap one at all? Now you know the answer. They barely do. They sell it when they have to, and they steer hard toward the expensive one whenever they possibly can. Because that is exactly where the $63 billion lives. And the real genius of the whole machine is that none of it ever feels like a trap while it's happening to you. It feels like responsibility. It feels like the mature, adult, protect your family thing to do. That's the costume doing its job. So hold on to the frame because you own it now. It's not insurance with an investment. It's an investment wearing insurance as a costume. And once you can see that costume, the friendly suit, the climbing chart, the warm repetition of the word permanent, every piece of it reads differently. Your family genuinely deserves to be protected. That part is real and you should 100% go do it. You just also deserve to protect them without quietly handing 15 times the commission to the person who drew you the chart. Buy the protection. Keep the difference. That's the whole game. The fear of leaving your family unprotected is real, but the urgency to overpay for it is manufactured. And now you can tell exactly which is which. I'll see you in the next one.